on the research side, and this is how I justify to the department of my chair that I'm doing something for the university as well, is that we are really very interested in looking at how access, whether it will or will not improve, number one, the usage of those journals, and number two, their citation subsequent to that. Because, well, people may be looking at it, downloading it. If they don't cite it, what does that mean? So we're very much interested in documenting the citation pattern, and whether in this new world of Google Scholar and this and that, whether we have new kinds of citation indexes that would be more useful than the old impact factors, and if so, how do we go about documenting them? And we're also very interested in knowing what the barriers to open access are. Some of you have already spoken about the culture, or the lack of culture, in terms of the open science, open sharing, and so forth. So how do we understand this culture better in a way that will entice authors to participate in greater open access? So we have a hidden, or not so hidden, agenda in the little box written in the bottom left there, and that is to try to influence the scholarly communication practices and access to the research literature. And this is the kind of events, that would hopefully, I don't think we have many publishers in here today, but we get into a very interesting debate and so forth about where things are supposed to be headed in terms of journals. Well, actually, I don't want to belabor this point. I think most of you in this room know about the problem of lack of flow of knowledge from the South. But one of the key things that we hope to be able to do against some of our partners have been telling us is that not only improve South to North knowledge flow, but South to South as well. A lot of the medical information in our journals are much more useful to other researchers in the other parts of the developing world. And many of the journals that if you go take a look have very detailed case studies of local descriptions of clinical cases, and most of them cannot make it into the other mainstream journal, even if it's well written, that meet international standard, because most mainstream big journals, medical journals, do not publish case studies. So you have a lot of unique local cases that are never really documented. So those are the kind of things that we hope will be useful to the user. I will come back to this issue about open access at the conclusions, because I know I'm going to run out of time. But these are some of the publishers from different countries that we're working with. Someone mentioned institutional archives. One of the things fortunate for us working at the University of Toronto, we do have very strong support for the infrastructure. So in fact, our librarians have kindly made available an institutional archive that allow me to house all the materials in BioLine International. So we have several copies of the stuff in case something should happen. Some of you might have heard a very unfortunate thing happened at the University of Southampton recently, where they literally had a big explosion and the fire blew off all their server. That's why I raised that question, though it's not particularly about Library of Alexandria. This is fresh on my mind. As I was saying earlier, we have volunteers, student volunteers that very kindly help us out with different aspects of the day-to-day operation. Publisher sent us this thing, we convert it into a standard format, we send it to Brazil, and everything now is done by email. Thankfully, again, one of the problems is that, of course, we still have publishers who would love to work with us, but actually have no access to email. And unfortunately, we are not able to accommodate that particular group of publisher at this point because of limited resources. I should mention INASP has been very supportive in the past, and then the past have actually helped with the several journals in our system in terms of conversion costs. Open Society Institute, as I said, recently have come on board with very strong support. This is sort of the basic workflow. We have stuff sent to us, and then we convert it, and then we send it to the archives, both in Brazil and at University of Toronto for safekeeping. This is a complicated kind of diagram. It's supposed to be animated, but I took out all the animation just to save time. You got the sort of hardcover journal on the one side, and then we convert it, we create XML abstracts, and then the XML abstract go into a database, and then into an SQL system, and the user do a query, and they will get a document on the fly that display. And then if you have a species link, you click on it, it will go into the Species 2000 database at CREA, and it will do a public database linking search for you. And then there's a copy that's also deposited into our institutional server every time we create a copy, that deposited into the CRIA in Brazil as well. And then the data is exposed to any OAI harvester after that. This is just a quick show of what the species link I was talking to you about. So if you see a species name in the abstract, it will automatically be highlighted, and you click on that, and it will do a Google search or for images if you like, but then you go through the gene bank and all the other thing as well. And for those of you who want to look at the code, it's pretty straightforward, just an XML tag. So these are some of the results for the publishers that we report back to them. Since we've been online with the journals, all the journals now are listed in the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals. Now this may not be a big thing, but for the journals already a huge visibility. As a result of being on DOAJ, now the libraries can easily catalog these journals, because they can go to DOAJ, and DOAJ have prepared the MARC catalogs, and so you can basically go to DOAJ, download a whole bunch of these information and put it in your library collection. So save the librarians a lot of time. So again, improve the visibility of the journals. We recently were contacted by Ehrlich's serials directory, so they were listed in there. This is actually kind of interesting. We've been contacting Hanari for a number of years to say, please include the content in Hanari because they're open access anyway. We didn't hear from them, and then a couple of days ago, actually before I left, my project manager said, do you know our site is listed as a part of Hanari? I said, well, this is news to me, and sure enough, when I went to Hanari, we're listed as partners, so I thought I'd include it there. We were also contacted by ISI Web of Science. Not Web of Science, sorry, it's Current Web Content, which is different from Web of Science. And they sent us a very nice letter, which I found out later it was a form letter. But anyhow, it was nice to be contacted. And now also all our archive contents are also listed in ISI Current Web Contents. Again, hugely improving the visibility of the material. We've been to many library conferences like this, so that librarians, we keep telling librarians are our best friend, and a number of librarians have been writing good articles about BioLine and some of these implications. So if you're librarians, please do the same. This is just a quick look at how, for example, visibilities actually happen as a result. So you have African Journal of Reproductive Health here, again a local journal from Nigeria, although excellent journal, so you get a chance to read it, not indexed anywhere. So if you click on a journal title, you come to a specific issue, and you go to the issue, you get the listing. This is fairly standard of the articles. And then if you want that particular article, you click on it, you'll see the abstract. And the abstract is both, in this case, is in English and in French. These are all in plain HTML, so very quick to load, very quick to download the full text. And if you do a Google search, sure enough, you'll find that particular article on Google very easily. And then we're pleased to see that actually now this particular journal is now also indexed in PubMed. And they were being accepted into PubMed a number of years ago, but now because of the exposure, they are able to get into PubMed. Now, the next stage we want to do is to do the link out from PubMed, so that if you happen to be in PubMed and found this article, you'll be able to link back to the full text from PubMed. So that would again be very useful for our partners. Some of you may also know about this search engine called Oyster, which is an OAI-specific search engine, and we're very interested to see, in fact, a very specific search engine will help us in this regard. And even though you can harvest all the data in OAI, in the Oyster, as you'll see in a minute, I'm going to go through this very quickly, this statistic. Oyster didn't show up very high in our referral list. This is just some quick statistic to show you some of the specific effects of being online with us. The important part to see is the number of download. Again, the specific number is not important. It's the trend that is more interesting. Of course, the more online, it seems the more downloads. These are downloads of specific articles, not hits. The Memorize, this particular journals actually have their own website as well, but they actually told us that they have way more downloads on our website than their own website. I think it has to do with the fact that at their own website there's only one journal, and we think because we're in aggregate, this has improved effects on their discovery. The referral, as far as search engines are concerned, Google's #1, followed by Yahoo, and then the DOAJ is a little bit down. We didn't actually find Oyster as a referral, which is kind of interesting. We're trying to work with the people in Michigan to find out why. As far as the domain country origins are concerned, it's not that surprising. It basically mirror the internet distribution almost. So we would like to get a bit more fine-grained domain distribution if possible, but at this level it seems to really mirror the distribution of the internet. I want to just steal a couple more minutes to talk about this if possible. In terms of one of the very interesting effects of open access, one of the journals has been documenting the submission. This is a journal published out at Mumbai, a journal of postgraduate medicine, and the managing editor has been documenting the number of submissions has been increasing steadily over the last few years. And not only has it been increasing steadily in terms of submission, he is able to document that there are a lot more foreign authors submitting to the journals. There are over 30% submissions that are by foreign authors. And this is a chart showing you the proportion of Indian-based author versus overseas authors. Again, we think that one of the phenomena of this is that if the authors know that their stuff can be found in a reliable, persistent place, they will publish in it. And then this is a breakdown of some of the authors, where they're coming from in terms of the nationality. And this is also very interesting in terms of citation impact. And these are number that is combined from several sources, including Google Scholar and Scopus. And you'll see that the impact factor, this is the traditional impact factor with reference to the journal itself, using ISI's formula. They are very, very low, even at the highest point is only 0.78, compared to Nature and Science, of course, at 20s. But for a developing country journal, 0.78 is actually pretty good. But again, the important thing there is the change in the trend over time, which is a significant part of it. Conclusion. Open access is making a difference, at least for some of the journals that we work with. Again, we don't know why some have greater impact than others. And we know that subscriptions is a tough sell for journals in developing countries, even if they are very, very high quality. There's just a lot of barriers to overcome in terms of selling subscriptions to journals from developing countries. So we need to explore other way of making available journals of developing country, other OA models, different access models, and we believe that aggregation is important, but open standard like OAI also is very important, and we need to do something to that data, that articles after it's been made available, and this is a point made by several speakers before me, that making the data available is only the first step. How we build the services, the added value component to it is really the key here. But without open access to the primary journal data, you cannot build the secondary services and value. So this is where we're at. Thank you very much.
Yeah, any quick questions?
Actually, it's a correction. First of all, I have to say I'm a great admirer of Byline. But your references to Medline and PubMed weren't entirely accurate. Medline has been one of the most generous indexers of journals coming from the developing world. In fact, Medline and Cavi are the only two major databases that have gone after developing country journals. So if a Nigerian journal was once indexed, then the service stopped indexing them. The reason could well be that it wasn't being published regularly.
Well, actually, the slide that I showed with the African Journal of Reproductive Health being shown by being indexed by PubMed, I was just showing that in fact PubMed is picking up.
It's always been very active, an active recruiter one place that you can go to and find journals published from major journals published in Africa, indexed along with the Journal of the American Medical Association, or NSAID, or NAA.
Well, many of our publishing partners have difficulties over the years. They apply for 15 years and still can't get on to PubMed for one reason or another. So different journals have different experience, I'm sure. But they are much more generous, let's say, compared to ISI.
One quick question. You said that you got some money from the Open Society Foundation, Institute for to fund 10 of them. What does that end up being per journal? What does it cost?
Yeah, the per cost for our labor costs in terms of conversion, server costs, and everything comes down to about $3,000 per journal. So that's how we calculate it.
Per issue?
Per journal per year.
Per journal per year.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't clarify that. And that's how we calculated that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. What Henry was saying, basically, a lot of this is due to because of open access to more visibility. Can you separate the impact of the open access versus being more visible? Is one of the highlights to make it more visible? You need to open access.
Well,
that in journals online.
That's a good question, because before we went open access, we actually went open access fully at the beginning of 2004. So there were a number of publishers that dropped out of our service when we decided we're going to go open access only. For example, East African Journal of Medicine, which has been on with us for a long time, African Crop Science, who's been for a long time, and Insect Science from Kenya. They all decide to leave. Now, we have statistics showing that a lot of users were interested in those 3 journals. They go to the abstract, but whenever they click on the download full text, and we will have that old thing that says you're not a subscriber, or you have to pay $3 for the article. So we were charging $5 actually for the article, and people stop. So we can document the hits to the abstract, but whenever people are asked to pay for the full text, people don't want to pay for it. So visibility is there.
Okay, because you have considered the abstract. The reference you might be able to get from your library, for example, copy. It's not.
But the East African Journal of Medicine is not available electronically anywhere at the time. Yeah, except through INASP, but you have to order it by photocopy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll hand it over
Last
to
one.
the last presenter.
I'm Michael Jeusen from the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academies. I'm not the Mike Jeusen that people in the WSIS community know. I'm another one. I haven't met my doppelganger yet, but I intend to, because he starts the next... We're 2 rooms away, but he'll be here in about half an hour. I'd like to talk about what we do at the National Academies. I'll talk a little bit first about what the National Academies Press is. We're the publishers for the National Academies. What we've done with open access over the last just over 10 years. A little bit on what it is that we do and how we do it, talk about our free PDFs to the developing world, and then sort of summarize. The National Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Research Council are arguably the most prestigious science organizations in the country of the United States. We publish consensus reports. We bring together 20 experts in a field to come to a conclusion about any number of topics. We do about 200 reports a year. These are books, book-length works, 200, 300, sometimes 400 pages long. Not journals. There is a journal, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that comes out, which comes through Highwire. But these are the consensus reports that come out. A couple hundred a year. We right now have 3,500 books plus up online on our site. We've been making these reports open access in one form or another since 1994. Now in 94, we started with page I, and you clicked and went to II, and clicked and went to III, and then got to IV. And if you wanted to go to page 45, you had to click all the way through. I got there in 1997. We started doing a lot more in terms of making these things usable online, not just seeable online. We now get about 1.25 million visitors per month. We're delighted about that. 85 million open book pages, and I'll show you that a year. Lots of people using our resources, lots of people browsing. Every page of every publication is available in some form or another for free to anybody who comes. We did a lot of work trying to understand what the right balance was between full access and what sometimes was termed cannibalization, because we have these two competing missions. The National Academies Press, which is the publisher for the National Academies, has to be self-sustaining. That's part of our mission, is to be self-sustaining. They don't give us any money, we don't ask for it, they don't want us to ask for it. But they do ask us to disseminate as widely as possible the works of the academies. So this is, in some respects, a paradox, in some other respects, a challenge, an opportunity to try some things out. This balancing act has driven almost all the strategic and tactical decisions that we've made over the last 7 years that I've been there. Whoops, went too far. We make for the developing world, 140 plus countries, any publication available in PDF for free, as well as the browsable form that I'll show you in a minute. We use I'll show you the name of the system that lets us identify IP addresses and connect those with countries in a minute. The way we sustain ourselves is by selling books or by selling PDFs to the developed world. We have about 2,000 of these publications that we sell in PDF form. We get no advertising, we do no subvention, we do nothing in those arenas. And we've had some sort of mixed results on that count. Here's a couple of examples of some of the books that we publish. Saving Lives, Buying Time, The Economics of Malaria Drugs in an Age of Resistance, Signposts in Cyberspace, A Patent System for the 21st Century, Smallpox Vaccination Program. We have the Guide for Care and Use of Laboratory Animals, free in a variety of translations, Chinese, Japanese, French, Korean, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, etc. Because we publish in so many different arenas, we've had to do some things to try to make sure that things are findable, which I'll show you in a minute as well. So for every book, we start off with something like this. This is a little outdated, and probably by the time you get back, we'll have redone some of the interface. But there's almost always some sort of a table of contents. You'll notice over here there's a skim link on this right-hand column, which is something that we put in place about 1.5 years ago. We've improved it over the last, about 6 months ago, we made some radical improvements. But it's a way for people to find, to sort of browse a chapter without having to go page by page by page. This page by page approach, however, does work pretty well for open access. We did a study back in 2002 to identify whether PDFs would be catastrophic, suicidal, or not if we gave it away for free. This was before we started selling things in PDF. So we would interrupt somebody who was buying a book, who had said, essentially, I want to pay $40 for this thing in print. And we'd say, oh, by the way, we have this available for 50% of the sale price, or 110%, or 0% for free. Would you prefer it for free than for $40? And we did this over the span of 3 months. We got quite a lot of data points, and we were working with some University of Maryland marketing and business folks. And the conclusion was that we would probably lose about 40% of our book sales if we gave PDF away for free to everybody. 40%, when you've got a $6 million sort of overarching framework, is a lot, and more than the institution was willing to bear. And we did the study because the institution was saying we should give it all away. But since they weren't willing to cover those costs, we had to find other ways to balance these things off. The sort of amazing thing to me was that 60% of the people were willing to say, oh yeah, I want the book. $40 is reasonable to pay for a book because I want the book. This was 2.5, 3 years ago. So that may have changed as we've gotten more accustomed to reading things online. But still, I think there is a fairly large demographic of people who really want print, especially when it's something that's book length. I think journal articles are a different animal. But for something that's a real book, this seems to work pretty well. So we have a navigational envelope around every page. There's always a table of contents that you can go move from chapter to chapter. Click on here, chapter to chapter, page to page. Go to the table of contents, or have a printable PDF page of this particular page. But about 2,000 of our titles are in this sort of HTML format. We keep replacing more and more of the page images with HTML from XML. We usually have a couple of related books that are available. We do a whole lot of language analysis to do some of the tools that we've built, especially this Skim that I mentioned before. This is the newest version of Skim, and what we do is we do some nice stuff where first we identify key phrases algorithmically in the publication. You can see I think you can read some of these. Influenza viruses, commercial poultry, animal health, influenza virus, controlling avian, pandemic influenza, wild birds. This is from the threat of pandemic influenza. Are you ready? A workshop summary. And then for each page, we find the juiciest chunk of content that has the highest value terms in there, and then display that. So for page 222, we have a chunk, 223, 224, etc. So every page has a juicy bit, technical term. But you also have the ability to click on any term and go to the chunks that have that term in it. So this gives you sort of a little mini glossary or mini index of this particular chapter. And if you're interested in turkey breeders, you can find out the chunks and then click on this to go to the particular page. So this is once people see this and use it, they find it really attractive and go back. At least that's what our stats say, is that most people can't imagine that this exists. But once they see it and they start playing around with it, they use it with every book that they can sort of find in their arena. Because we have this diverse array of content, we had to build a pretty complicated search engine interface, and we're struggling with trying to make this nice and pretty. But this is a search for mammography, and any of the results have a button like this, which was, well, a button like the one down here that I can't roll over, which is find more like this, which again takes all the key terms in that publication, actually just the top 50, throws it in our search engine, brings back a bunch of good stuff back. And so you can sort of navigate three-dimensionally in this way. You can use this stuff on the side where we extract key terms from the result set, so that if really what you'd like them to search next is prostate cancer, it's a one-click search right over to the search engine. And this thing right here, I'll show you a little bit later on. This is the drop my rough draft and find more like this from our collection, which again, once people start playing with it, they're sort of intrigued by it. This web search builder is also available for, the idea is that the publications of the National Academies, especially the National Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine, tend to be distillations of a field of study. And so the language that gets used in this field of study tends to be terms of art. Tends to be the sort of scientific language that's used, at least in English, to discuss these sort of issues. And so if we can figure out a way, or we try to figure out a way to let people use this language to search the wider web. How do you search Google Scholar effectively? How do you search Google when you get 1 million hits back? Well, you do it by having paired phrases, not single phrases. You use phrases, not words. But that's kind of hard for somebody to think of. If I put Wes on the spot and said, give me 5 terms that pertain to influenza, he would stumble, but if he could see a list, it's much more likely he could say, oh yeah, that's one, that's another, that's another. Even if it's a field of study, he'd have a hard time inventing terms. So this is an idea that you can give people this list of terms, let them click on it, add it to a list. I'm going to add wild birds. I can then, if I had a web connection, click on this for Google Web, this for Google Scholar, this for Google Print, Yahoo, MSN, or our own National Academy Express, and it would search for phrase A and phrase B in this larger collection. You can add your own term, you can remove terms, you can mix and match, you can select another chapter to use. It's an interesting tool that, again, once people see, they then start sort of exploring. I think this could be very useful for people who are not native speakers of English, because again, recognizing key terms is much easier for someone who's not a native English speaker in English than inventing them, because it is not your language. It's kind of hard to find those terms of art. Get that again. The reference finder, it's the last tool I'll show you, which was available on that search result page. And this, if I had a 5-page rough draft of some article I was writing, and I pasted it in here, I could hit go, hit this go over here, and, that's right, sorry, hit that go button, which was there, and it would find more like it from our collection of 3,500 things, or you could build your own web search builder from the terms from your rough draft to search the web more effectively. So these are some sort of interesting tools that people are using from all over the world. The developing country special access is something which we have taken to heart because it just seemed really clear that it was something that was the best use of dissemination. So on the OpenBook page, we identify the user. This is a faux version from Kenya, but this is the way it displays. So somebody who came from Kenya was browsing a page, would see this note that said, you're eligible to receive free PDF versions of National Academy's publications. Down here, click to download the book as a whole, as a PDF book, or select chapters. Someone was talking earlier about how frustrating it is to be in the middle of a download and have a communication break and lose your connection. We allow chapters so they're smaller chunks. If somebody wants to download sort of a meg at a time instead of 10 megs at a time, they can do that. The only thing that we ask is that they sign in. We get their email address, but don't send them anything. We don't harass them, no spam. But we would like to kind of know how people are using these sort of things and what they're trying to use them for. We get some comments, some really great comments, and we get a little bit of sense of what these people's occupations are. We get a variety of folks. We're using this very inexpensive software called GeoIP, which sits on the Apache server and finds the IP, connects it to a country, connects it to a 2-letter abbreviation for the country, which you can then do some other stuff with. But it means that we can identify what countries we want to do what with and how we want to respond to them. And it's like a couple $100 a year for this subscription if you're a nonprofit organization. So if this is something which would make sense for a variety of server-based publications, it's something worth exploring, GeoIP. This is the impact on income, not of the developing country stuff, but on sort of open access and improved access. And I thought it might be interesting to this particular audience. What this is is, the pink one is just general visitors per day. And we sort of plateaued. We don't have the 2005 data in very good shape yet, but we sort of plateaued on that. But this blue one is book sales, right? And right about there was when we started replacing our page images with HTML. We knew HTML would be better to read, easier to copy, easier to paste, better for everybody. But by replacing it, we knew we would also make it easier to read this thing online. 2 minutes? Okay, I'm almost done. So that's good timing. The green line, it shows the PDF sales, but still it's a decline. We're starting to lose a little bit of our income. Not a lot, it didn't plummet, but it did start decreasing. So there is a cost to this, and even as our visitors went up during this time, because people liked what they were seeing better, there was a certain amount of cost. It's a cost we're willing to accept because we think it's worth it. Here's some little descriptions. I lecture and research in the field of parasitology and other courses in biology. Materials from your website will be most helpful in view of the dearth of books in most libraries and bookstores. One of my favorites was this one at the bottom from Bangladesh. I'm working on a project to rejuvenate rice or paddy lands abandoned by shrimp fisheries on the coast and estuarine areas of South Bangladesh. Yeah, where are you going to find that? Well, that's because we have a book on saline agriculture, salt-tolerant plants for developing countries. But if he hadn't found that because Google could index this because it was open access, he wouldn't have seen it, he wouldn't have gotten the benefit from it, he wouldn't have gotten the PDF down from it. Same thing with sea turtles, this other one from Iran. I appreciate greatly this American manner, which doesn't care for any race, color, belief, nationality, religion, etc., in transferring information. It's like, yes, okay. There's so much bad news about America. It's nice to have a little bit of good news. So we know it's worth it because we have millions of readers in the US, millions of readers in the rest of the world, and we keep trying to find the right balance between, again, disseminations and sustainability. We are balancing right now. It's a tightrope. We're sort of plateauing, and we don't foresee making any changes. We hope that as more readers grow, we'll sell out just a little bit more to the developed world, so that we can end up being self-sustaining and moving on to the next decade, giving this stuff away. That's it for me. And that's the URL there, www.nap.edu. Any questions? You're all tired. Okay.
Just want to keep everyone from that tea as well. I talked and others have talked about metadata, and the trouble with that is harvesting it. It means human beings normally creating it. These sort of active indexes where you've not actually employed a human being at any point.
No, we couldn't have done it if we had a human being living.
But what value you've created by that? And I think we need to take a lesson that human beings creating metadata is not necessarily actually a very sustainable approach.
Well, I think it's a really important point you're making, and for those of you who might not be able to hear it, it's sort of how do you get metadata, and is metadata being done by humans the right way to go, or the only way to go? It was a choice we made it continues to be a choice, to have machines do as much as we can. And while it took some time to develop the mechanisms to harvest these key terms, it was something that we could not possibly have done without machine work. If we had humans doing it, it would just have taken forever, and we wouldn't have been able to have the Find More Like This and the data extraction and the other things that make the site come alive. I'm suspicious of metadata in general, not because it's not valuable, but because it's sort of bound by the old techniques and old thinking of the notion of journals and abstracts, which developed because we had print and because most people couldn't get access to this stuff. And so ISI and Biosys and these other organizations were doing indexing and abstracting and metadata creation because we had to have some mechanism of getting these things. Well, we now have full text. We now have ASCII. There ought to be ways to use the ASCII to extract the information, to be able to do automatic categorization, automatic sort of filtering, and all these tools, but we're not quite there yet. We keep getting closer. Anything else?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the speakers this afternoon. I think if we break until 5:10 to come back for the final session. Thank you.
Oh, she made it. Oh my God.
Well,
Oh, I can cope with that. I'm glad you. You're This is something you had at the hotel. You were missed. Rick, I gave it to Rick. I'll bring you back in about an hour or so.
It's a nice little camera you got there. It's quite a mic.
240.
Yeah, the whole thing is,
All right, okay.
you know, I started
All right,
doing
ciao, ciao.
surveys, and then
Ciao.
went to qualitative research, and then we went to video economics.
Okay.
And the market and people need consumer level quality.
As long as you got good mics, it's a good to
I would buy.
A lot of people skimp on the mic, and of course, all they don't bother because they
You
think,
can't use the language.
no, because the sound and motion.
But now they're
What's
making this little
the
3.
gadget on the bottom for? Is that part of the microphone too?
So you could have 2 audio inputs if you wanted to.
If you want to take that mic and this one.
Yeah. But if you want to go kind of a little bit simpler, you can take it directly from an XLR input to a 1/8" connector.
This is designed for the camera to mount on.
This is specifically designed for a consumer camcorder. So
That we're in the closing session here, and people have their eye on the cocktails maybe at 7 o'clock. So I shall be asking the speakers to keep the time. If you got your 2-minute piece of paper, definitely I shall take it off you. We're going to introduce now the last of the 3 sessions of our day, or our 3 sessions, I should say. It's not really a day. Looking at a set of related topics around information access and the issues of bandwidth. We've heard a lot repeatedly today about the issues of bandwidth, the issues of ability to access information, or the inability to access information. I really feel that a lot has happened in the last 5 years since I joined FAO in terms of bandwidth improving, but it's a strange process. It's happening in a number of different ways that can't necessarily be predicted. So I shall be fascinated to hear what the 3 speakers have to say this afternoon. The first is someone I've been wanting to meet for a little while, Mike Jeusen. I'll let himself introduce himself. But his title is ICT Bandwidth Challenge in African Universities, which indeed is a challenge. And I'll pass over to you.
Thanks for the introduction there. I'm a part-time knowledge analyst for the International Development Research Centre of Canada and a freelance consultant for the rest of the time. And one of the issues that I've been working on since the early 90s is connectivity for academic and research institutions. So I'm just going to kind of give you a general overview of some of the issues here. Just to start off with, what is the bandwidth challenge? Just to summarize, before we go into a bit more detail on some of the data, is that we can see that available bandwidth can cost thousands of times more than what tertiary institutions in Europe and North America are paying for their bandwidth. And as a result, bandwidth is extremely limited and insufficient to meet any of the demands that are being placed on it in most of these institutions. And so the internet links are usually congested, running at maximum capacity. And in many cases, the possibilities of expanding the available bandwidth is severely restricted. And of course, in many cases, bandwidth is not well managed, so the available bandwidth is not as well used as it could be. What I'd like to do now is run through a survey that I helped put together called the African Tertiary Institution Connectivity Survey, or ATICS. And it was carried out by the African Virtual University with World Bank funding. And we surveyed 83 tertiary institutions in Africa in 40 different countries in 2004. And the survey is now in the process of being updated by the IDRC parent project. If we look, for example, at the results that we got from the 82 institutions that filled out this aspect of the questionnaire, which is online at the website that you can see there, so you can get the individual connectivity details of the 83 campuses and the overall survey summaries. We can see there that the average amount of bandwidth that the African institution has is about 500 kilobits up and 750 kilobits down. In some cases it's as low as 28k, half the speed of a dial-up link. And the most bandwidth that any of the institutions we found have is 7 megabits. So you can see there really is very little bandwidth around. If we look at the cost, the average cost is about $5 per kilobit per second per month. Some universities are paying as much as $36 per kilobit per month. We also did find in some cases that there's some universities were not paying anything for their bandwidth because it was being provided for free by another institution. If we look at the number of users per network computer broken down by region, we can see there that Central Africa obviously is the least well-endowed region with 171 users per network computer. When we say network computer, we mean one that is connected to the internet. And of course, Southern Africa, being the most wealthy region, has the best ratio of 11 users per computer, giving us an average of about 55 users being students and staff. If we look at the amount of bandwidth each of those computers have, we can see a big range there, with the average being only about 3 kilobits per second, which is basically about the speed of a dial-up line. In some cases, some universities have much better ratio, 10 times greater, 36 kilobits, and in some cases the universities had 10 times lower than the average at only 0.32 kilobits. What's quite interesting is that in fact we were surprised by how many institutions actually had fiber technology on their campuses, but less than half do. 52% did not have any fiber on their institutional campuses, so this again means that the ability to share the available connectivity is limited. Reliability of the connection is also a problem. We see here that depending on the type of connectivity, the number of hours that the link is down per month ranges from about 10 hours per month for satellite connection to the most reliable connection being fiber there at about 0.15 hours a month. And then looking at the levels of bandwidth management, we can see again that the majority of institutions do not do any bandwidth management. 41% actually do it in some respects, and 5% said that they had a very limited amount of bandwidth management. So the impacts of this are basically that users are very frustrated in their attempts to use the internet. There are too few network PCs. One of the ratios that we didn't show on those diagrams is actually the number of students per network PC, but it's very high, so there are very few computer labs on many of the campuses. In some cases, only postgraduate students are allowed to have access to network computers, and the undergraduates have to go outside to cyber cafes. And even when they can get access, the connection is extremely slow or unreliable, and they sit for many minutes waiting for an individual web page to download. And of course, librarians are unable to deliver the digital information that is available, and that frustrates them a lot. And consequently, the decision makers at these institutions are inundated with demands for more bandwidth. But basically, as a result of all this, you see a severe underutilization of the available ICT resources on campus, because these expensive investments in equipment and technology are not able to deliver what they are capable of. So what are the possible solutions here? Well, clearly we need more bandwidth at lower cost. And one of the responses that can be made in this area is to establish bandwidth purchasing consortia, and this is actually the first step that has been made in a number of cases. And this can take place on a national level, on a regional level, and on a continental level. So, for example, some countries now have national research and education networks, but not many, probably only a handful, 6 or 8 countries so far. We have seen the recent emergence of a regional effort to establish bandwidth purchasing consortia in the Southern African region with the newly formed Southern African Regional Universities Association, which is looking at purchasing some dark fiber. And then something that predates this is the efforts of the Partnership for Higher Education in Africa, which is a consortium of US donor organization foundations, which has supported the purchasing of bandwidth jointly on satellite links for their partner universities in Africa. And this was assisted by the African Virtual University, which also does a similar activity for its own 24 or so campuses around the continent. Clearly, management of existing bandwidth resources is critical in an environment like this, where the amount of bandwidth is so low and so costly. But overall, we need more and better national, regional, and continental infrastructure to ultimately address this issue in a big way. And we need to combine all of these efforts. Even if bandwidth were to double, it needs to be effectively managed to ensure maximum efficiency. So one of the key problems in terms of ensuring that there is improved infrastructure on the continent is that we still have, in general, a restrictive regulatory environment. And this is something that academic institutions in Africa need to lobby for, the improvement of the competitive environment, which has resulted, or the lack of competition has resulted in such high costs and limited investment in infrastructure. We see that state-owned monopolies still dominate the markets for infrastructure. There has been some foreign investment in these monopolies, but in general this has been in return for continued exclusivity, so the environment hasn't really improved for most institutions. And we have seen in a handful of countries some limited introduction of 1 or 2 additional fixed-line players. But as we've seen in North America, Europe, and in Asia, introducing just 1 or 2 additional players hasn't really changed the ballpark, and the incumbent operator still manages to dominate the environment. And unfortunately also we see that in most countries the use of satellite and wireless data systems is restricted because of these monopoly operators continuing to maintain a franchise over their markets. Some of the other issues, of course, is that it's going to be a long time before Africa can actually approach the environment that we see in North America and Europe, because the northern continents have been able to benefit tremendously from the huge investment in fiber infrastructure that was laid during the .com era, and subsequent with the bubble bursting, there's been an awful lot of dark fiber available, so cross-Atlantic links are now down as low as $1 per gigabyte per month. And so until we see much more investment in infrastructure, it's going to be very difficult to approach this kind of levels of bandwidth availability. We've also seen very little use of the alternative infrastructure that is available now. A number of rail companies have rights of way in which fiber could easily be laid, but again, because of the restrictions on the entry of new competitors, they have not done so yet. Similarly, electricity operators have grids that span nations and cross many national borders, and many of these actually carry fiber already, because new electricity cable usually comes with a fiber core, but we've seen outside, only South Africa as far as I know, and Ghana have electricity operators that actually carry telecom traffic as well, and gas lines are another option that hasn't really been fully exploited, except for Cameroon, where the gas pipeline going to Chad has fiber running along it. In general, we've also seen that these operators do not want to provide dark fiber because they want to control the market, and so they want to sell it on as a value-added service. So the ability to actually purchase the fiber at the lowest possible cost is not there, even when fiber is available. And also, which affects a lot of the connectivity between institutions within the country or between countries in the region, is that there are very few national peering points and no regional internet exchange points at this point. So data has to travel over expensive international circuits to go from one institution to another in the same city, or to go from one institution to another in neighboring countries. Of course, with the brain drain, there's very limited capacity to design, implement and manage networks, so this has meant that many networks are either not effectively implemented or take a long time to be installed. Discounted rates for bandwidth are not common in Africa. Only Senegal and South Africa, to my knowledge at this point, have an E-rate in which educational institutions can obtain discounted bandwidth. And the other issue, of course, is that there's lack of awareness among policymakers of the importance of access to bandwidth for research and education institutions. So in many cases, when universities could perhaps to afford more bandwidth, they don't actually have the budget to, or when the bandwidth is available, they don't have the budget to purchase it. Just to look at the general pattern of connectivity of institutions in Africa, this map was developed for the IDRC parent study, showing in brown the fiber cables that exist, and an indication of the density of the 650 research and education institutions that we were able to identify on the continent. And you can see that Southern Africa, there's a fair bit of fiber infrastructure connecting most of the institutions. There, the availability of high bandwidth links is possible, but that's mainly the cost that is an issue. The very light colored links are microwave circuits, many of which actually have fallen into disuse and cannot carry much traffic, so those aren't particularly useful. We can see a little bit of progress in West Africa with fiber now running into Mali from the SAT3 landing point in Senegal, and of course in North Africa there are a number of institutions connecting to the Mediterranean fiber networks. You can see a high density of institutions in East Africa though that don't have any access to fiber at this point. This is just to give you an indication of the progress that we expect to see over the next 5 to 8 years in Africa. This map I developed as part of the NEPAD project to look at infrastructure rationalization on the continent. The white lines show the fiber that is in existence, and the other lines indicate various levels of plans of projects for additional fiber. Probably the green line shows the most likely implementations over the next, they will start to be implemented in the next 2 or 3 years. Of particular importance is this green cable here, which will probably be laid within the next 18 months. That's the East African submarine system, commonly known as EASY, which will also connect Madagascar and the remaining countries around the eastern and up to Sudan. So we will actually have a ring around the continent. Also, of particular note is that we do have fiber now that runs to Latin America. On the left there, the Atlantis 2 system, and the SAFE system that connects Southern Africa via the West African cable and all the West African countries to India and Malaysia. So we can see the possibility for traffic to travel across the entire southern hemisphere. The blue lines indicate projects that are being promoted by NEPAD now, but at this point there's no guarantee that they will actually be implemented over the next few years. Just to dwell again on the importance of bandwidth management, as we saw in the Attic study, unusual to find good bandwidth management in any of the research and education institutions. And this is unfortunate because it is within the reach of these institutions, and it's critically important to actually make use of this very scarce and expensive resource. What it involves is first an understanding of the traffic flows, and then at the most basic level, extensive caching of the types of data so that many copies of the same data aren't pulled down over the single congested pipe. And of course then the next step is to implement acceptable use policies, and this kind of policy can be enforced both technically, for example through traffic shapers, so that individual institutions can more equitably share the available bandwidth. And then of course there are human policy enforcement, so that trivial use of the network is detected and acted upon. Just to summarize there on some of these conclusions then, I think it's interesting to note that in spite of the fact that universities were actually at the forefront of bringing the internet to Africa, you can actually see that the digital divide is at its most extreme between when we compare the bandwidth availability in these institutions with the bandwidth availability in North America and European institutions of equivalent size. We also see that agencies supporting the research and education sector need to cooperate and coordinate more on their joint projects. There's actually dozens and dozens of different initiatives being implemented or being planned at the moment to assist institutions in obtaining better bandwidth, but very few of them are actually collaborating and coordinating. And of course the African institutions themselves need to coordinate and collaborate more, and in particular at the national level we're hoping to encourage the formation of national and regional research networks so that they can lobby the governments for policy change in the telecom arena, and in addition share the costs of available bandwidth and establish bandwidth purchasing consortia. Many of these issues will be discussed in the parent conference tomorrow and the following day. And then of course African policymakers need to be more aware of the importance of research and education networks, and the importance of telecom restructuring, which is part of the lobbying process that these institutions must become involved with. And then again, of course, bandwidth management is the key. So just in my last slide, to kind of organize some of these different initiatives, I think we can see kind of 5 levels there in which action can take place. Firstly, at the level of campus networks, to improve the level of campus connectivity. This obviously requires not only training but also investment in assisting these institutions to obtain better campus lands, for example. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the national networks are critical, and these need to be encouraged to form in countries so that they can engage in joint purchasing consortia and policy change lobbying. And then regional networks to actually establish cross-border